Another recruiting class in the books as the early signing period is now behind us. Not a lot of fireworks leading into the finish line for Tennessee, but still overall a very productive class for Josh Heupel and company. A lot of intrigue around several signees, and who better to join Volquest and talk about that than On3 Director of Scouting and Rankings, Charles Powers. Charles Power. Charles, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Matt. How about you?
I'm doing great, man. I know you're busy, so we appreciate your time.
Sure thing.
Let's just kind of dive into this. Want to talk about some individual guys, get your overall thoughts on Tennessee's class. But before we do that, I think for you, probably one of the balancing acts in terms of what your position entails is you catch a lot of criticism over your rankings. Obviously, you hear from fan bases on social media. It's really hard to appease everybody. So I want to ask you this: what goes into a ranking and an evaluation for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors. So I think starting off, kind of the basis for our rankings is film and how you play on Friday nights, right? So that's for us. It starts coming out of the freshman year. We track these guys all the way until the last snaps of their high school career, and then of course see them in person over the course of the cycle. I think most notably the National All Star games at the end. That's your Under Armour All American game, your All American Bowl, and then we see these guys throughout the cycle in person, but it's kind of a mix of everything. The basis is the film, and then we have, of course, your measurables, athletic, verified data, things of that nature, track times, and then getting verified sizes as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. Ultimately, we're trying to project towards the NFL draft, just because from our time doing this, it's the most accurate indicator of a players' skill and overall talent level and potential at the college level. So that's kind of what we go for, but there's a lot that goes into it. And it's certainly a moving target because when we start to rank these guys, they're 14, 15 years old, and some of them are 18, 19, or most of them are 18 and 19 by now. So we see a lot of growth in maturation and development over that time, and then a lot of players emerge as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. It is certainly a moving target, and it's something that I think becomes more and more crystallized the later in the process, which might not always dovetail with these guys kind of coming on the radar and getting recruited, because colleges are kind of racing to make their evaluations and get these guys in the boat.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive into some individual guys, kind of take me through your thoughts on Tennessee's class as a whole. What stands out to you the most about that, and kind of what has impressed you with the way that Josh Heupel built this in year three?
Yeah, so I think, and I've said this the past two cycles, and I think it's evident this year as well. I think Josh Heupel has a very defined vision in the types of players that he recruits, and I think it shines through just kind of in the evaluations, right? So I think starting off, like the speed and playmaking at receiver and running back, the skill positions, they certainly value athleticism, the ability to stretch the field. That's of like paramount importance in Josh Heupel's offense. So I think with a guy like Mike Matthews, Braylon Staley, they certainly add those targets on the outside. I think size on the offensive line. I think Tennessee, when you look at this year and kind of how they want to build up through the trenches, I think adding size, big run blockers, because I think when you look at Josh Heupel's offense, the type of blocking that they're asked to do, it's a lot of run blocking, a lot of RPOs to kind of confuse defenses. So I think the type of offensive lineman they're bringing in kind of fit his skill, fit his scheme. And then again, like when we're looking at the top of the class, like a pass rusher like Jordan Ross, I think one of the differentiating factors with Heupel to me in the SEC defensively is they really target speed rushers off the edge. And we've seen the last several cycles with a guy like James Pierce, and they did that last year as well. And I think Jordan Ross fits the type that they go for off the edge. It's a guy who can pin his ears back, highly athletic, get after the passer. Because I think Tennessee likes to envision themselves playing with leads. They jump on teams early historically. And that's kind of Heupel's MO just from a game flow perspective. So I think adding pass rushers that are really going to get after opposing quarterbacks if you're kind of anticipating playing with the lead is certainly smart. And Jordan Ross fits that bill.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to Mike Matthews as we dive into some individual players here. You and I talked about him earlier in the cycle as the
Mhm.
fall kind of started. You think very highly of him. What is it with Mike Matthews as you've seen him over the course of his career at Parkview that you think makes him special?
Yeah, Mike Matthews is just a very good athlete, I think, for starters. He's, around 6'1", 195. He's well built. He's a basketball player, a guy who's like an above the rim basketball player. And you can see that on Friday nights. He was a guy who, when I first saw Mike Matthews, this was in person. This was at OT7 finals 2 summers ago. And he was playing really well as a receiver. So I went up to him. I kind of really hadn't fully blown up as a national prospect yet. I kind of went up to him between games and I asked him what position he was being recruited at. And he told me safety. And I kind of mentioned to him, I was like, I think you're probably going to start getting recruited as a receiver pretty heavily as well. But he's always kind of been that two-way athlete, two-way playmaker at the high school level. And we saw him play a good bit of safety this year as a senior. So I think he's a guy who, once he focuses on one position and, like receiver at Tennessee, I think he's going to see his play and consistency improve. That's probably an area where I think he could continue to get better relative to some other guys who just play straight receiver at the high school level. But I think he has a ton of upside, a ton of athleticism. This is a guy who runs laser 4.4, really good in the combine setting. So and can make guys miss after the catch as well. So I think he brings a lot of what Tennessee wants at the position, and I think his best football is still ahead of him. I think we'll see him make a jump after a year or two on campus with the coaching he's going to get.
I think one of the questions that we've answered, in terms of rankings this cycle is kind of why has Mike Matthews fallen down the On3 rankings a little bit when he's maintained 5-star status elsewhere?
Mhm.
Just kind of walk us through that process if you can. I mean, obviously, it's a kind of one thing that I've said is it's kind of razor thin. If you look at 32, which is 5-star status, to 46, where he's at, like, first of all, how razor thin is that margin? And kind of, in your opinion, what has led to him sliding down
Mhm.
the rankings at On3?
Yeah, it's extremely thin. And I think one thing you have to consider is there's like 14 positions that slot within that range. So I think starting off the way we formulate our rankings, first off, the basis for it is by position. So I think in Mike Matthews' case, it is a stellar year at receiver. Probably in my years of doing this, is the deepest receiver class nationally. We have, I think, 5 stars right now. And there's so many more that I think in normal cycles could push to be a 5-star. Mike Matthews would fall into that group. And there's so many like top 50 types at the position. So it is, I think, for starters, he's got really, really stiff competition at receiver. These are all guys who put up great stats. They're highly athletic. Most of them are big. I think that's one thing that's unique about this receiver cycle nationally is most of these guys are kind of big outside receivers. And they have really high skill levels. So I think there's a lot of those factors that go into play. And I think the fact that Mike Matthews might not be quite as polished as some of them probably gives some of those guys that moved ahead of him an edge, at least early. But I think his potential is still extremely sky high. Having him in the top 50, I mean, that's projecting as like a very early round pick. And I think when you're getting in that range, it's really, really splitting hairs. It's like you said, Matt, it's razor thin. And I would also like to add, like our final rankings aren't done yet. So we still have the national all-star games and one more update. So there's a lot, I think, that could play, change moving forward. And there's going to be fluidity really until January.
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. Another guy that I think burst onto the scene as a junior at CCS, but probably had some questions because of the level of competition that he was playing was Boo Carter. He flips into 6A football in the state of Tennessee this year, has a really productive year, around 2,800 all-purpose yards and 25 touchdowns. Coming into the season, sat on the edge of the On300, now has moved firmly into the On300. Kind of where do you see Boo Carter's stock after this senior season at Bradley Central?
Yeah, I mean, his stock's definitely moving up. And I think him doing it at a higher level, being productive, in just his ability to make plays in so many facets. I mean, I think if you're going to start with Boo Carter, this guy is a pure football player, right? Like he finds ways to impact games. That's offense, defense, special teams. He's doing everything. And I think his instincts, his nose for the ball, his ball skills, his playmaking ability when the ball is in his hands is at a high level. And I think he's a guy who, you find a place for him on the field, and he's gonna, he's gonna wedge his way into making plays. Like I think that's pretty evident by just watching his senior year, and I think the fact that he's played his best football as a senior is really notable. Just from my time doing this, you tend to want to bet on prospects who are launching into college from from a momentum perspective, just their on-field play, developmentally, and I think Boo Carter fits that mold. When we were going through our last going through the position for our last rankings update, I thought it was like pretty clear. He's a guy who deserved to move into the on 300, and he's one we'll continue to look at now that his senior season's over. And I think, he's got a shot to keep moving up further. Yeah, I think just the overall playmaking ability, and just how really dominant of a player he was as a senior certainly is a feather in his cap in like the rankings process.
Absolutely. You talk about Josh Heupel and everybody wants to talk about Josh Heupel and the offense, and you can't do that without talking about the quarterback position. They land Nico Iamaleava last cycle, the number 1 overall player in the 2023 On3 rankings. You flip the script. It's kind of hard to go out and land a quarterback after that. We've seen it time and time again, regardless of the program. But Tennessee able to hone in on Jake Merklinger and land him, another guy that's in the On 300 rankings. But I think more so what I want to talk to you about with Jake is when you look at his skill set and the offense that he runs at Calvary Day, how much does it align with what Tennessee expects from the quarterback position in the way that you've evaluated it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think starting off with Merklinger, he's a guy who he knows where to go with the ball. I think he has a case as the most efficient high school quarterback of this group. Now he's a different prospect from Nico, right? Like he's not gonna blow you away physically, but he has just really good timing. The game moves slow for him. I think he just is a really sound decision maker. And I think if you look at like the stats and the production, I mean, he was well over 13 yards an attempt as a senior. Like I think he had 38 touchdowns, like 2 picks, just extremely efficient. So I think he's doing that, making chunk throws, throwing the ball downfield. Not a guy who like really had like a bunch of padded stats just from a quick game perspective. So he's throwing the ball downfield with timing and accuracy. And I think there's a place for guys like that in Josh Heupel's scheme. And I think if you surround him with playmakers, like he could come in and play well. So I think he's a guy who, landing a player like him after Nico, fairly different skill sets, but you can make both of them work in Josh Heupel's offense. And like you said, Matt, it's hard to go back to back, blue chip quarterbacks, especially after you land a 5-star and the number 1 prospect in the country.
Absolutely. And then finally, as far as individual players go, want to ask about Jordan Ross. You and I talked about him early in the fall as well. And one of the things for Jordan Ross, I think, is he has those measurables. He has what you want to see from a length and a speed standpoint. You talked about wanting to see more of his production. Seems like that lined up a little bit more on film this fall. 12.5 sacks, 23 tackles for losses of Astavia Hills. Kind of where do you see the ceiling for Jordan Ross? Because he's a guy, in my opinion, that's maybe not a polished product, a finished product. So where do you see the ceiling for him as he, gets ready to come to Tennessee?
Yeah, I think he's got a very high ceiling. I think when you look at Jordan Ross, so like to this point in his career, he's really winning off of athleticism, and just his ability to run down plays. He's you can see right there, like he has a lot of range as a defender. He's getting upfield. So I think once he adds to his pass rush arsenal, his skill set, works on technique, moves, counter moves, I think he's going to be I think he has a lot of upside. So he's certainly not anywhere close to being a finished product. And I think when you look at how good he played as a senior, that's got to be pretty encouraging.
Yeah. And then finally, we'll get you out the door here, Charles. I know it's a busy time of the year for you. One guy that you could pick if you were looking at it to maybe be a sleeper in Tennessee's class that could exceed expectations? Just something you maybe saw on film, that has caught your attention a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's ranked pretty high, but I got to go with Peyton Lewis. He's a guy that I'm just significantly higher on than everybody else. And I think he just with his burst, his production. When you look at the running back group nationally, he's one who I think has the profile just from a speed perspective, a production perspective. I think there's just a lot that's really a positive indicator for him. So he moved up for us in the last ranking, and I think I wouldn't be shocked if he's if we look back on this cycle and he's one of the better running back prospects.
Absolutely. Charles, we appreciate your time. As always, continue to follow along at Volquest.com for all of your recruiting and Tennessee football coverage needs. Charles, thank you.
Appreciate it.